Okay, color correction in Photoshop. This is a potentially confusing process because most of the time people are looking at correcting color in Photoshop from a aesthetic perspective, meaning how do you want it to look? Visually, like what colors go well together, and so you're going to adjust an image to taste, so to speak. Like if you're cooking a recipe and you just guess how much salt you need to add, you taste it, and then you add some more. This is not that kind of process. What we're talking about in Photoshop today is the technical aspect of correcting color to prepare it for offset printing. So we're going to approach this more like a chemistry activity where you measure exact amounts. And we're going to use some tools in here to measure. So the topic of the class is metrology, which just means measurement basically. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to measure points in this image and we're going to adjust the colors specifically to turn out their best in print. Now, I'm skipping some of the steps in the assignment to just go through, so don't follow exactly what I do here. Take this as a whole, and hopefully if you're watching this video, you've already looked through the assignment, so you can pick up on the parts where we're going to jump in. Now, a couple of things to be aware of is that I'm working on the RGB image first, and then I'm going to convert it to CMYK. As I do, be aware of how you're converting the image. And also make sure that your workflow is such that you're going to preserve your work in Photoshop. So there's a couple of things, I'll point them out as we go. All right. So first off, let's take a look at what we have in this image to start with in terms of just what's there. And we can do that a couple ways, but I'm going to open up the histogram panel, go to Window. And if you're not familiar with the histogram, it's going to be your best friend for a lot of things. Now, in this case, it gives us information showing where the distribution of colors and brightness values are throughout this image. The left side of this histogram, sorry, that's kind of tiny. My mouse is having problems. Anyway, the left side represents the darks, or black is on the far left and white is on the far right. Everything else in the middle is there. So if you look, I'll show you a bigger view here in a second, but if you look on the right, it doesn't quite extend all the way to the far side. So that means there are no pure white values in this image. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of this is subjective in deciding how you want the image to look, but let's do a levels adjustment to just correct for the dynamic range is what the PDF talks about. So first step, when we're doing adjustments, always use adjustment levels, meaning here in the bottom of the layers panel, you can click on this little circle, open up adjustment levels, adjustment layers. We're going to click on levels. I don't know why my mouse is flickering. I don't know if it's doing that in the recording, but hopefully I don't go crazy. Anyway, there's our levels adjustment. You could go to image adjustments here, but this is going to be destructive. It's not going to show your work and it's the wrong way to do it. So don't go there. Okay, always use adjustment layers. So we'll see this here, levels. And we can look at this up top. I'm going to drag out the properties panel so that we can just kind of focus on it all by itself. And you'll see the histogram represented here without any of those distracting colors. We're just looking at brightness so far. These sliders, if I drag the one on the right, this is the white point, we can move that over a little bit and you'll see that on the image, it makes it brighter. Because what we're doing is we're saying right now, 255 is the brightest point in the image. But if we move this slider over here, we're saying 237 is now the brightest point in the image, which has the net effect of making the image brighter overall, okay? So what we want to do here in the RGB version of the file is to just simply adjust that a little bit so that we can get the dynamic range maximized. We want to have the brightest point in the image be the brightest point in the image. Now that sounds kind of silly, I guess, written in. I don't know what the word is for it, but digitally in the data that makes up this image, there is no pure white when the slider is all the way to the right because the levels that we see on the histogram don't extend all the way over to the right. Okay. So by moving this over, we're saying put the white point over here. Right. Now, how far you drag that, it's subjective depending on the picture to a certain extent, but we are basing it off of data. Don't just eyeball the image. Like if you just look at her face and keep dragging this slider over, it's going to get way too bright, obviously, but let's say for whatever reason, I think that looks good. Well, that's going to throw away any of the data in my levels that are from be on the right side of that. And I wish I had a zoom feature in my screen recording software so you could see a little better what I'm looking at, but I'm looking at the properties panel for the histogram. Okay. So currently my right-hand side of that white point slider, it's at level 189, which means that anything above that, all the way up to 255, all of those levels are now just white. So don't do that. That just blows out your image, and we want to not do that. So pick a point where we are compressing all of that data into our full histogram is going to be contained within those bars. Okay. So on some images that may mean you're dragging the black slider over. Some you may drag the white slider. The midpoint here, we can be a little more subjective with that and saying we want the overall image to be a little brighter, a little more contrasty, a little flatter. Okay, so I'm going to make mine just a tweak over 1.06. And I'm actually showing you the real assignment. So if you want to copy my numbers, you can right here, but that won't last forever. So we'll hit, we don't have to hit OK. It's an adjustment layer. It's just there in my layers panel. All right, so that's that. And from there, I want to double check a couple of things. Let's go over to the assignment page, and it talks about the RGB image adjustment workflow. So pay attention to some of the things in here, read through that, get familiar with the process, but I want to point out one thing here. If we were to use these eyedroppers right here, these eyedroppers let us say, what do we want to make white? So if I click on that and I choose something that is not white, like this little plastic foot here. If I click on that, it makes it white. That's what the white point eyedropper does. It moves all the sliders within the RGB channels. See how these got adjusted drastically? In order for that point that I clicked on to turn white. Now I don't want to do that, so I'll hit undo. Okay, but that's what those eyedroppers do. All right, one other thing to be aware of is that, again, we're adjusting color by the numbers here. So we need to see those color numbers. We're going to do that by looking at the info panel. So go to Window and Info. And the info panel, I'm just going to put it over here. And what this does is when I put my eyedropper or cursor or any other tool out over the image, it's going to show a live readout of the RGB and CMYK values. And we can click on these little eyedroppers to change what's displayed. So if we want to see lab color, if we want to see whatever, we can change that there. Okay. So I'm going to leave mine on RGB and one on CMYK over here. Now, if I put my cursor over her skin, for example, there on her face, you can look at the CMYK color values up here, look in this area, and see that there is very little cyan, plenty of magenta, plenty of yellow, and no black. And if we look at the RGB values over here, we can see that there is lots of red, less green, and even less blue. All right, so those numbers, those numerical values tell us what we're getting in terms of the actual digital information that makes up the colors of those pixels. All right, so useful tool, info panel, make sure you have it open as we go. All right, now converting your colors, again, like I said, I'm skipping steps, so make sure that you're following the instructions. But when you go to convert your colors, let's say that for whatever reason, I'm assuming I'm done with this image. Okay, I want to make sure that I want to save it first off. Always save a copy. So we're going to save as and make a save and keep the RGB version. Okay, so assuming that I've done that, let's say that I already did save my RGB copy, then I'm going to convert it to CMYK and save as again. So I have both an RGB copy and a CMYK copy. Now to do that, we're going to go onto the edit menu and choose convert to profile. All right. Convert to profile is how we convert the profile. Now, some of you may have done this before where you go to image mode and just change it from RGB to CMYK. That's one of the worst things you can do in terms of color management because it doesn't honor the profiles, which from the reading, hopefully you understand at this point that color profiles are pretty critical. So again, edit, convert to profile. All right, first thing it's going to say is what is our source space, meaning what is the profile that this has right now? It's Adobe RGB. That's the file that I opened and I didn't change it at all. The destination space says, what do I want to convert this to? And any profile that I have installed on my computer, I can choose here. So for example, if I wanted to print this on my Epson printer, I could choose the type of paper that I'm going to use. I can convert it to that profile. And that way, those exact colors, the color values, the colorimetry of that is going to be preserved in the file. I don't want to do that right now. I'm going to choose Grackle, let's say. Again, follow the instructions in the assignment, not exactly what I say here. But I want to use black point compensation, use dither. This last box right here, flatten image to preserve appearance, this one be careful with. If I do this and I hit OK, pay attention to what happens to my levels. They're gone. This is the correct color management workflow. Just be aware that in some projects, in some classes, this one maybe, maybe not, you're going to want to be aware if you need to preserve your adjustment layers or not. So by choosing that option to flatten, that's going to give us more accurate colors because the levels adjustment layer that I already made, it's based on RGB colors. So this levels adjustment is going to be incorrect when I convert it to CMYK. So for accuracy and consistency, do flatten your image to preserve appearance. For the purposes of this assignment, assuming you've already saved that RGB version, yes, we're going to go ahead and flatten it now. Okay, so then here's our CMYK version. First thing I would do is go File, Save As, and name this the proper name for the CMYK version of the file. All right, so it is in CMYK. It is in the Grackle color profile, and we want to actually prepare this for print now. When we think about how print works, I have another file open right here. Print on the offset printing process, the full color printing process, is going to give us a sheet of paper with a bunch of dots on it. These are small. You have to look through a magnifying glass or a loop to see these. But the result is that we see color. Now, if we were to layer these together in something like this, for example, then magnified, we see the individual distinct colors. When we look at it at normal viewing distance, those dots are too small for us to perceive and to differentiate. And so we're going to see a solid color there. Now, the thing I want to point out here is the amount of white paper that's showing through is going to affect the brightness. The mix of the different colors is going to affect what the color is, or the hue that we perceive when we look at that and see it kind of blending together to our eye. The amount of black in there is going to affect the darkness of it. Okay, so there's different characteristics of the print, and dot gain and other things are going to affect it too. But overall, we're concerned with how much white is showing through here. Now, if you were to look at a print, let me see, here's another one where it's a little bit more crowded with dots. This is flexo. You can see the smudging and smearing of those dots. This is what's used to print on like plastic and things. But there's a lot less white showing through. The substrate is showing through less. Now, thinking about this right here, if you look at this, these colors, if you were to see, I needed to get a better sample to demonstrate this for you guys in the video, but these are impromptu videos. Imagine a printed document, a magazine cover, for example. Glossy, nice finish and everything, high resolution, color saturation, all that. And it's got a white title or white text in it. That's fine. Usually a magazine cover is going to have some kind of coating to maintain gloss across it. Now, imagine, you may have seen something like this before. Imagine you print a full color document on just regular matte paper. The ink itself, where you print ink, is going to have kind of a coating. It's going to add a little bit of a sheen to the paper, the ink itself on it. But anywhere that there's a solid white thing, like the text or a hot spot or highlight in your image, like for example, some of this white paper back here. If we were to print this photo out, let me zoom in on that white. Really close. Now there's actually texture and detail there, and you can see in the info panel, looking at the info panel, that it says 0C, 9M, 21Y, and 0K. There would actually be ink going in there. But if we were to set this up to print to where there was zero ink going into a white spot, it would look like kind of a hole in your print. You're going to see bare paper, which technically that's what white is. But that doesn't always look very good. And it's going to stand out and it's going to have a different feel to it. So often it's practical, especially in a photograph, to tone your white a little bit, meaning we're going to add some color to it. Now we're going to do this using the curves adjustment panel. Okay, so we're going to do a curves adjustment layer here. And just like levels, there's a drop down where we can pick individual things here. The overall, this curve is going to allow us to just change the brightness of the image and contrast and things like that. But that's not what we're going to use it for. We're using it for the individual colors, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. All right. Now, first thing we need to do though, if we're going to color by the numbers, we need to know what points we're going to adjust the color of. So key things are our black point, our white point, and our midpoint, which correspond to things here on our curve, right? If you were to just eyeball this and say, what is the whitest thing in this image, the brightest white, you might go to her shirt. I think it's probably the most neutral colored white in this image. All right, but we can check that out. We can see what the brightest point is, and we're going to do that using a thing called the threshold adjustment layer. So we'll just put that one on top. And threshold is kind of like levels. We have a histogram and a slider, but it has a very different result. What it does, it says anything on one side of the slider is white, anything on the other side is black. So this is really helpful because we can drag it all the way over to the side and see what is the whitest point in that image. All right. So if I get this far over, I can see that, let's zoom in a little bit. If I toggle it on and off, oops, sorry, that's not the right toggle. Let's do this. She's wearing a pearl necklace and there's some highlights on it that are bright, and those are showing up as white. Her shirt is probably the most obvious standout thing in there that's white though. And visually we know, like our brains, if you think about the image and look at it, paper isn't always white. Sometimes it's kind of yellow. This background paint on the wall is probably kind of a yellowish paint, but it's a white shirt. So some colors you can know that they are white. This office furniture is pretty uniformly standard gray. So we're going to use kind of some knowledge of the real world in addition to color by number to say that I'm pretty sure that that's white. The pearls, on the other hand, pearls are pearl color, right? Pearl is not a pure white. So I wouldn't recommend balancing off of that. All right, so now that we see what that is, let me turn it back on again. We can work in this view and look at this. And I'm going to go right up here on the collar. Okay, because that's kind of where the most of it is. And if I keep going over, we'll see, yeah, that's definitely our whitest point. All right, now, it's hard for me to just keep going back and forth over here to do this. So what I want to do is add some targets. I'm going to use the eyedropper tool and get some information. So over here on this point, if I hold down Shift and click, it does the same thing as if I were to hold this down and open this up and find the color sampler tool. That's what we're using, is the color sampler tool. So I'm going to just click once there, and it puts a little target indicator on that point. And I'm going to ignore it for now. But if you look at the info panel, it's going to show a number 1 now. So let's just slide this all the way over the other direction now and maybe zoom out so we can find what we're looking at. And this time we're looking for the black point. So anything on the left-hand side of that slider is going to be our darkest black. So let's keep going. All right, and one thing I should mention before we get out of this, when we're looking for white, and this is going to be more important on the image that you select for the second half of this assignment, you're looking for the whitest with detail, okay? Highlights, specular highlights, reflections on things, sometimes those are white, and those are okay to be overblown, just blown out completely white. We want the whitest white that has detail. So same thing with the black. We want to go down to the black, but if we go solid all the way down to the black, there's nothing left in there, right? So we can just put in a level at a time here and see that, okay, there's some black showing up here. And that thing, what is that? That's the picture frame? Picture frame, okay? So again, use your brain and think about these a little bit and zoom in on a part that's not showing up in threshold. Like down here, there's enough light on it that's not showing as black in threshold. Down here, is that really black? Or is it a little off color and it's just dark up there because it's in shadow? Maybe, maybe not. So if it's questionable, I'm going to look for a different spot. So let's see down over here. What's this? All right, so this book right here, if I look at the lit part of the book, that looks like it's black right there. Up here, it's black and it's in shadow. So I'm pretty confident that's actually black, not a dark color casted thing. So that's important. We're looking for neutrals, things that we know should be neutral. Not that they are neutral in the image, but we know that they should be neutral when we do color correct this. So I'll put another target right on there and then zoom back out. Now the midpoint, that can be a little trickier to find. We're going to use another technique to find the midpoint because it's hard. to use threshold really is good for just finding black and white. So we're going to close that. And I'm just going to turn the visibility off in case we need to come back to it. And you guys are going to want to show your work, so leave it there too. All right, now let's go back into our curves adjustment layer. And I'll click on the icon here in the layers panel for the curves. So we get the property panel. Oh, double click, sorry. There we go. All right, and then what do we do with this thing? Well, for one, we're going to say what we want the white point to be. And like I showed you with levels, we can just click on white and click on this right there. And then if we look at the cyan, did it make any adjustment? Maybe a tiny little bit. Magenta, a little more over here. See that change? And then yellow, definitely more adjustment to the yellow. White is on the left-hand side in CMYK, and black is on the right-hand side in CMYK. So opposite of the RGB histogram. All right, and then black and so on. So we can do that, but we want to do this a little bit more precisely, okay? Rather than just clicking on it, we're going to use the numbers. This means looking up here. Now, we can tell just looking at these numbers which one is our white point, right? Because it's the one with no ink in it. 0, 2, 4, 0. That means there's very little ink there. It's going to show up as white paper in our print. Over here, there's lots of ink. It's going to get darker and darker. All right, so looking at these numbers for our number 1 point, that's what I'm going to use to make adjustments over here in the properties panel. So let's go. Click on cyan. Now, what numbers we want to use, this is going to be something that you look at in the assignment. It's in the document, but I'll show you what that is now. So something to be aware of is that cyan is a less powerful color in terms of the cyan pigment in the ink, that is less intense at reflecting color. It's just a weaker ink, weaker pigment. And so to get the same effect, let's say you want something to be gray, it's actually in CMYK going to have more cyan ink laid down to look neutral because it takes more cyan ink to get the same effect as less magenta and yellow. Okay, so we're going to actually add some cyan into that white point by just clicking over here. And let's drag this up. Okay, we can go a little too far and you see the image gets a color cast, right? But if we keep it subtle, we're looking at the color numbers. I'm just watching over there. I'm going to go to 6% cyan. Okay, and what that does is it makes that white point actually have 6% cyan ink. When this prints, instead of just blank paper in that spot, there's going to be a little bit of cyan ink. We'll go on to magenta. Now magenta is a stronger pigment, so it needs less. I'm just going to bring that up to like 2%, 3%, sorry. Okay, so very little change. Yellow, let's bring that one down a little bit by dragging that point over to the right. Down to 3%. So 6, 3, and 3, that's actually going to be white. Okay, and if you don't believe me, let's change this. Let's say, switch this over to RGB color. All right. Now it says that white point with adjustment is 240, 242, and 244. Those are pretty close, right? Now I told you cyan is a weaker color. We could actually add some more cyan to that if we wanted to kind of even it out better. All right, but anyway, let's go with that. Let's put this back to CMYK. All right. So this means that when this document prints, the halftone pattern that we see in that spot is going to look something, not quite as many cyan dots as you see right here, but there will be some cyan dots in there. There's also going to be some yellow and some magenta, which is good. That's what we want it to be. All right, now let's adjust the black point. Okay, and so that's this one over here. Now for the black point, what do we use there? If we just put down 100% K and nothing else, that's actually not going to give us very good results. We want to have some detail in there. We want to have proper ink density that is going to reproduce correctly on a sheet of paper. And we can do that by, again, using specific numbers. So I'm going to scroll ahead to where that was. Should have had that ready. Okay, so we converted and our colors, there's our values for white point. And then the black point, where did it go? All right, the black point, I'm gonna point out a mistake that I think I'm gonna add back to this PDF. I think I'd like to have you adjust that black point because we want to just be aware of what's happening with those colors. 89% cyan, 79% magenta, 73% there. I think I want to just neutralize those and get it to match. It's not quite as critical what exactly they are, but it is important that they match so that it's a proper true black. Okay. If you're familiar with printing terminology, the term rich black refers to having a balance of K or black ink plus a layer of cyan, magenta, and yellow on top of that to really fill it out and make it a solid rich black. Otherwise, Kelvin, wrong class. That's the photo class. K or black ink, it's going to be black dots of these. So like this one over here. There's going to be some white paper showing through. The white paper is going to be kind of overpowering the edges of that black ink, and you're never going to get solid black out of just printing with black ink. So that's why we add some more of those colors. And in a photograph, Photoshop recognizes and does that already. If it's an RGB black, meaning 000 for red, green, and blue, then Photoshop is going to give you a blend of CMYK that adds up to that. It's never going to make it just black ink with no CMY. All right, so let's play with that too. We're going to go into our black channel here real quick, and I'm just going to drag a slider over a tad to just bump that up barely. I'm going to say 99% just because, it's easy to tell a difference there. If I go anywhere beyond, 100% or 100%, if I'm looking at the numbers, not the image, be careful there. So I'm just going to go like 99%, just barely there. And that's going to be close enough for all our purposes. Okay. Now I've got a little more magenta than yellow, so I could add more yellow in there. And I'm going to go with a value of 75 just because it sounds good to me. So drag this over. What am I in? Yellow? Okay, I want a little more yellow, so I'll drag this point over till I get 75. And then I'll go into magenta. And this one, I want a little less of it. So in this case, I'm just going to drag the slider down. So I get to 75 right there on my black point. And then again, we need a little more cyan than the other colors. So we're going to go to cyan here. And 89%, I'm just going to round that to 90. Maybe. Come on. There we go. Okay. Now, the image that we're looking at here in the background, let me just toggle this on and off. I'm never quite certain how much color is going to be represented in the recording here on the screen. So I don't know how much you're seeing there, but the image on my screen, which is color calibrated and managed and up to date and everything, there's a big difference. Okay. So I think on your screens on the YouTube link there, it might be less pronounced of a difference than what I'm seeing. So I'm just hoping that you see something anyways as I toggle that on and off over and over again. Okay, now one last thing that I want to do before we move on is talk about that middle point, that midpoint, that gray. All right, so for this, we're going to use a little different method. I'm going to go ahead and click on this little finger. This is called the targeted adjustment tool in the properties panel. And I want to find a point that I think is neutral, meaning it's going to be right in the middle here, the midpoint on my histogram and on my curve. Now, I'm going to do that by using the target adjustment tool. Did I actually click and put a point right there? This shouldn't have a point. What am I doing? Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to put this out over the image. And as I move that around, you can see there's a little circle sliding up and down on my curve in my curve's properties. Okay, so as I go over like something that's pretty dark, that circle goes all the way to the top there, which is blacks. If I go to something bright, then it goes to the other end, and it tells me where that adjustment is going to take place. So the point is, if I wanted to, I could just say visually, this gray right here, this shadow, I'm going to click on that and drag it up. And it's going to brighten that tone. I'm not actually wanting to do that though. So instead, see, let me turn my eyeball back on there. Okay. I'm just using it as a visual reference to find the midpoint. So I think that it's going to be, I'm guessing it's going to be somewhere on this gray stuff here. Okay, so I'm just watching as I move that around through lighter or darker parts of that gray. Where is the exact middlemost point that I can find? All right. I think at this point I want to zoom in a little more and get more precise. One other thing to point out is, do you see the grain and noise that's in there from the photo? Make sure that your sample size on the eyedropper tool is set to an average of 3 by 3 or 5 by 5 at least. That way it averages out the grain. We don't want to deal with that. Okay, so I'm looking for a point that's a little bit brighter to get down more to the middle, and that's pretty close right there. I'm not actually going to click on that. I'm just going to kind of visually remember where that is and switch over to the eyedropper tool, the actual eyedropper tool. Can I do that? Can I get it on curves? There we go. Okay. So just the I keyboard shortcut, if we'll get you there, we want this tool right here that's going to allow me to put a target down. So I'll click with that again and put a number 3 target down. And that tells me what the values are for my ink here. 44, I'm sorry, 40, 45, 54. There's an excess of yellow in an area that should be gray. So that's what we're going to color balance next. I'm going to go into the yellow channel. And ignoring all this stuff that I just did, I'm looking at that point. The only reason I used this targeted adjustment tool and put that little circle there is so that I could find out where I needed to put that target. It lets me find the midpoint on my histogram, or at least relatively close enough. All right, and then I'm going to actually adjust by dragging this down. And when I drag the curve down over here, I'm going to watch over here on the info panel to get these numbers where I want. Okay, so I'm going to drag down the yellow a little bit. And I'm not getting a result there. What am I doing? Oh, I was looking at the wrong number. Okay. All right. We want more yellow. We drag it up. We want less yellow. We drag it down. And we want less yellow. We wanted to get it closer to the others. Okay. So I can subtract out a little bit of yellow from the midtones this way. And I'm just going to go with like 48%, around 50% or so, because again, that's our midpoint. So we'll do that. Then I'm going to go to magenta. And for this one, we want to add a little bit of magenta in there. So I'll go to my midpoint here, looking at the graph. Where's my midpoint? My eyes are tired. I've been in too many classes today. Right there. There's my midpoint. Let's drag that up a little bit until we get around the same range as the yellow. I'm going to say 48% there too. We'll keep going up till we hit that. Okay. And now cyan, we need a little extra cyan to offset how weak of a pigment it is. So we're going to go beyond 44%. We're going to neutralize it by dragging this up. But then we're going to go a little bit further just to make sure we're good. Okay. Now let's zoom out. And this time, if I toggle it on and off, you should see a much more significant difference. We're removing the color cast. Now, it's important to be aware of lighting conditions in your photo. This is where it takes just an eye for how light works. You got to look at places and things in the real world to understand how they should look in print or in image editing as well. If I were to choose this area right here, there's a very yellow under desk lamp thing that shines there, and it makes very yellow light. If I color correct off of this area, it's going to make everything else way, way too blue, which is not ideal. If I adjust off of maybe this area over on the other side, let me zoom in right here behind this guy. This area is pretty blue right there too. And the reason it's blue is because there's a window over there with daylight coming in. And daylight is much cooler, much bluer than the overhead fluorescent lights that are in this room as the main light source. So be aware in your subjects and in your photos what light is the primary light that you need to balance. And if we balance for the main light source, which is that fluorescent overhead lighting in that room, that office, then yeah, the window light's going to turn kind of blue and that under desk lamp is going to turn kind of yellow. And that's okay because that's naturally how we would see it too in the real world. Okay. But if we pick a minor light source like the yellow up here and balance off of that, then everything else is going to get really weird. And the blue from the window is going to be like super saturated, way too blue. All right. So that's the process. That's the process of just preparing this thing for print. We want to make sure that we're following the steps in the assignment instructions too. But these are typically the things that people have the hardest time with is getting that done. Make sure that you use adjustment layers and that those adjustment layers are present in your PSD files, so you get credit, okay? And I think that was a long video for me to show you a couple things, but hopefully it helps. Let me know if you have any questions.